Have you ever wondered what truly haunts a man long after you've walked away? It's not the texts you used to send or the way you made his favorite coffee. It's something far deeper, something that stays etched in his memory because it's so rare. He doesn't miss the surface you. He misses the way you made him feel, the emotional safety you created without judgment, the quiet confidence that never begged for his attention, the grace you showed in moments when others would have exploded, the way you believed in him without losing belief in yourself, and most of all, the joy you carried that was never dependent on him. Men don't say this out loud, but these are the traits they regret losing, the traits that are impossible to replace. At first, he may have thought he had time, that you'd always be there, that your strength, your support, your independence were just normal. But it's only after you're gone that he realizes what you gave was extraordinary. If you've ever questioned your worth or why he seems to spiral after you've moved on, this will explain everything. The truth is, he doesn't miss the relationship, he misses you, the woman he didn't know he'd never find again. You know, there's something we don't talk about enough when it comes to relationships, and especially when it comes to what men actually miss after you walk away. We get caught up in looks, charm, sex appeal, all these things that grab attention in the short term. But the truth is, the things that really haunt someone after you're gone, they're not flashy. They're felt quietly and deeply. And one of the most powerful traits that men regret losing long after you've disappeared from their life is emotional safety. At first, they don't even recognize it, especially if they've taken you for granted. They may go off into the world thinking they'll find someone more exciting or someone who doesn't challenge them as much. But after a while, when the novelty wears off, they start to feel something missing. It's subtle, but it gnaws at them, and they can't quite put their finger on it. See, emotional safety is one of those invisible forces that makes a relationship feel like home. It's when he could come to you and say the difficult thing, the ugly truth, the fear, the insecurity, and instead of shutting down, you listened. You didn't try to fix him, you didn't mock him, and you didn't use his vulnerability against him later. You just heard him. You gave him space to be human. And if you've ever done that for someone, really shown up with that level of compassion and stillness, know that it mattered more than you think, because the world doesn't give men many places to feel safe emotionally. They're taught to perform, to be strong, to keep it all together. But inside, they crave the same thing we all do, to be seen without a mask on, to be accepted even when they don't have the answers. When you gave him that, you gave him something sacred. Now, here's the painful part. In the moment, many men don't realize what they're being given. They confuse safety with boredom. They mistake your grounded presence for something normal or ordinary. And so they go searching. They chase intensity, drama, someone who challenges them in toxic ways. But in time, when they hit walls in those connections, when they realize they can't open up without being shamed or dismissed, they remember you. Not because you were perfect, but because with you, they could breathe. And it's in that silence, maybe months, maybe even years after the breakup, when they're lying next to someone new and still feeling alone, that the regret creeps in. Not because they miss being validated or taken care of, but because they miss the feeling of being able to fully be. With you, they didn't have to constantly posture or prove themselves. They could rest. And that kind of rest, that kind of peace, that's what they now understand is priceless. But here's where you need to be strong, because emotional safety isn't just a gift you give to others, it's a reflection of how deeply you love and respect yourself. You created that environment because you've done the work, because you know how to hold space, not just for others, but for your own emotions. And you know what happens when someone abuses that space? When they show up inconsistently? When they drain you or disappear? You don't cling. You don't beg. You don't go chasing after someone who didn't recognize your emotional labor when they had it. You walk, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom, because you know that what you offer is rare, and that staying in spaces where it isn't valued just burns you out. And yes, it hurts when someone you gave that to doesn't realize the depth of what they had until it's too late. But that's not your shame to carry. It's theirs. You see, emotional safety isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it leaves a quiet echo in the heart of the person who loses it. It lingers in the places they can't fill. It's in the late night thoughts that whisper, "She actually understood me, and I'll never find that again." That's the power you hold, not in how much noise you make when you leave, but in the silence you leave behind. And when someone realizes they can't replicate that peace, that's when they start to feel the weight of your absence, not because you made them comfortable, but because you made them feel safe. And once someone's had a taste of that, the absence of it is almost unbearable. So don't you dare think you have to become louder, more dramatic, more impressive to be unforgettable. Just keep being the person who creates that calm, solid space. Because the right person won't just appreciate it, they'll protect it with everything they have. And if someone was foolish enough to let it go, let them live with the silence. You know what's crazy? So many people think that in order to be unforgettable, you need to be the loudest voice in the room, the one who texts first, chases hardest, and tries the most. But in reality, it's not the effort you pour into chasing someone that makes you stand out. It's the quiet confidence you carry when you don't. That's the kind of confidence that doesn't scream, doesn't plead, doesn't try to convince anyone of your worth. It's just there, present, undeniable. And the truth is, men feel that. They might not know how to put it into words, but when a woman is grounded in herself, when she's not chasing, not bending over backwards for someone who hasn't earned that level of access, that is the energy that lingers long after she's gone. Here's what happens. In the moment, he may not even notice it. He might confuse your calm presence for indifference. You might feel like you don't live inside a contract, but you can't. Here's what does. Someone literally feels betrayed by your appearance of love. That is the energy that lingers long after for indifference. He might assume you're replaceable because you didn't make noise, you didn't fight to keep him. But give it time. Let a few months pass. Let him go on a few dates. Get a little attention from women who talk a big game but have no substance behind it. Then he starts to remember you, the one who didn't need to be loud to be valuable. Because that kind of confidence isn't just attractive, it's rare. And we always regret losing what's rare. When you carry yourself with that kind of poise, it communicates so much without you having to say a word. It says, I'm not here to audition. You either see me or you don't. And if you don't, I'm okay walking away. That's the woman a man looks back on and says, she knew who she was. She didn't try to become what I wanted. She just was. And I didn't recognize how powerful that was at the time. And this doesn't mean being cold or detached. That's not confidence, that's defensiveness. I'm talking about the warmth combined with boundaries. It's the ability to show up fully, love deeply, and still walk away the moment you're not being valued. That's power. That's self-respect, That's the kind of woman whose absence makes more noise than her presence ever needed to. And here's the twist. Men often chase validation from women they're unsure about, but they remember the woman who never needed theirs. She made him feel good, yes, but she didn't need him to feel good about herself. And the paradox is, when you stop trying to convince someone you're worth loving, you actually become unforgettable. Not because you begged for it, not because you fought harder, but because you were at peace with losing someone who didn't know how to hold you. That kind of confidence disarms a man, because suddenly he's faced with something he can't manipulate or sway. You're not emotionally volatile. You're not panicking about whether or not he texts back. You're living your life, and you're not letting someone's attention or their absence define how worthy you feel that day. And that's not easy, by the way. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing the difference between wanting someone and needing them to validate your worth. It's knowing that if someone doesn't see you, that doesn't mean you're invisible. It just means they're blind. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't adjusting yourself to make him feel more comfortable. You didn't shrink when he pulled away. You stayed full, stayed grounded, and when things didn't feel right, you didn't make excuses, you didn't beg. And you know what happens after that? After the dust settles and the newness of someone else fades, he realizes something he couldn't see before. That what you brought to the table wasn't just affection, it was balance, it was peace, it was the presence of someone who could love deeply but never lose herself in the process. He realizes you weren't high drama, you didn't play games, you didn't punish or chase or cling, you were just there, loving, strong, intuitive, and then you were gone, quietly, without a show. And that silence, that absence, it's deafening. Because the women who stay grounded in their value aren't the ones begging to be seen. They're the ones remembered. Not for how loud they were, but for how complete they felt without needing anyone else to complete them. And that's the part he regrets. Not that you loved him, but that you never needed to prove it. You just were love. Strong, still, radiant love. And he didn't know how to hold that kind of fire until he no longer had it. You know, one of the most underrated qualities a woman can have, and the one that ends up haunting a man long after she's gone, is how she held herself during moments of pressure. Not just when things were going great, not when the sun was shining and the texts were flirty and the plans were exciting, but in those moments of friction, when emotions ran high, when expectations clashed, when misunderstandings stirred up something deeper. That's when your true emotional weight shows. That's when a man sees something in you that either roots him to you or something he only comes to understand after you're no longer there. Because here's the thing, most people when they're hurt get reactive. They lash out, they withdraw, they punish. And it makes sense, we're human. But when a woman can hold her dignity in a storm, when she refuses to trade her self-respect for control, when she chooses clarity over chaos, it lands differently. And not just in the moment, it leaves a long-lasting impression that burns into his memory. I'm not talking about being passive. I'm not talking about swallowing pain or pretending you're okay. I'm talking about the strength it takes to speak from a place of truth without drama, to not get baited into emotional warfare, to be able to say, this isn't working for me, without turning it into a weapon. That kind of grace, that restraint, it's rare. And when a man experiences it, even if he doesn't appreciate it in the moment, he remembers it later because it showed him something profound. You weren't trying to win, you were trying to understand. You weren't desperate to be right, you were committed to being real. And believe me, he notices it more in your absence. when he's out there, encountering new dynamics, facing new arguments with someone else who might not have your emotional maturity, that's when he feels the difference. Because now he's facing a version of conflict that doesn't come with calm. He's in situations where yelling replaces curiosity, silence replaces communication, and accusations replace introspection. And it doesn't take long before he starts realizing that what he had with you wasn't just comfort, it was depth, it was wisdom, it was emotional leadership, even when things felt messy. You didn't fight dirty. You didn't throw low blows just to make a point. You didn't lose yourself in the battle. You brought presence instead of panic. And even if he didn't say it out loud, he felt safer with you because of it. You weren't easy to unnerve. You didn't collapse under emotional pressure. And that quiet steadiness, that unwavering strength masked in compassion, it's unforgettable. Most people think the traits that linger are the flashy ones. The way someone looked, the chemistry, the intensity. But those are just the fireworks. What stays with us is the consistency, the way someone handled themselves when things weren't pretty, the tone of their voice when they were hurt, the way they still respected you when they had every reason not to. That's the kind of thing that doesn't go away. Because when you experience that level of grace under pressure, it sets a standard, and that standard ruins casual. It ruins drama. It ruins the next person who hasn't developed the emotional muscles you already showed. And let's be honest, sometimes in the moment, that grace doesn't get celebrated. Sometimes it makes you feel like you're not being heard, like you're the only adult in the room, like you're doing the heavy lifting emotionally while he gets to operate on impulse. And it's frustrating. But here's what you need to remember. Emotional maturity is never wasted. Even if it wasn't appreciated fully, it taught him something. It reflected something back to him that he couldn't ignore. Maybe he didn't rise to meet it, but that doesn't mean it didn't land. Because long after you're gone, he'll remember that steadiness, that ability to stay rooted in who you were, even when he lost grip of who he was. That calm tone when he expected chaos, that depth when he was shallow, that compassion when he thought you'd turn cold. He'll remember it because he's not finding it everywhere. He's not getting that same stillness in storms. And one day, he'll sit with that realization that he fumbled someone who didn't just want to win an argument, but wanted to build something stronger through it. And maybe then he'll understand the weight of what he lost. Because grace doesn't just echo through the relationship, it lingers long after you've left the room. You know what people rarely talk about? How deeply someone can feel the loss of being believed in, not admired, not worshipped, not endlessly praised, but believed in. That quiet, unwavering sense that someone saw your potential and chose to stand beside you, not because they needed you to be perfect, but because they saw who you could become if you actually leaned into your own greatness. Most men don't realize what they had until that belief is no longer there. Because here's the thing, we all walk through life with insecurities, doubts, blind spots, areas where we feel like we're not enough or we haven't arrived yet. And when a woman comes into a man's life and she doesn't just see his current state, but sees through it to the man he could be, that sticks. That doesn't go away easily. It doesn't get replaced with the next pretty face or the next fun distraction. When you're the kind of woman who doesn't need to play games or inflate his ego just to get his attention, when you're grounded enough to see his flaws and still speak to his strengths, that means something. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's unforgettable. What he realizes too late is that you didn't believe in a fantasy version of him. You weren't in love with who he pretended to be or who you hoped he'd someday become. You were in love with the reality of him, but the best reality of him. You saw the version of him he could be if he just showed up fully, if he pushed himself, if he stopped running from his potential. That kind of belief is rare because most people either do one of two things. They either put someone on a pedestal and love an illusion, or they tear someone down and remind them constantly of where they fall short. You did neither. You chose to see the truth and to speak to it, not in a patronizing way, not in a controlling way, but in a way that quietly said, I know there's more in you, and I'm not here to fix you. I'm just not afraid of your depth. And in the moment, he may not have understood how powerful that was. Maybe he took it for granted. Maybe your belief in him felt overwhelming. Maybe it even scared him, because when someone believes in you deeply, it shines a light on all the ways you're still hiding, all the ways you're still shrinking. And not everyone is ready to face that. But when you're gone, when your voice is no longer in his life, when the late night conversations stop, when he's no longer hearing those subtle reminders that he's capable of more, that's when the loss hit, because no one believes in him like you did. No one looks at him the same way. No one sees him like that. He starts to notice that most of the people around him only respond to his surface, his image, his achievements, his words, but they don't see his struggle. They don't understand his silence. They don't challenge him in a way that feels loving instead of threatening. And that's when it clicks that the connection you had wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about attention. It was about growth. It was about partnership. It was about something real. The way you believed in him gave him a mirror, not of who he was pretending to be, but of who he actually could be if he stepped into his full power. And that reflection is now gone. That mirror isn't there anymore. And when that happens, a man is left to sit with himself in the rawest way possible. He starts to hear your words again in his head, not the dramatic ones, not the emotional ones, but the subtle, sincere ones. The "you've got this," the "I see more in you," the "don't play small." And suddenly, those moments aren't just comforting, they're haunting. Because now he's wondering if he'll ever find someone who'll hold space for both his ambition and his fear. Someone who won't try to change him, but who won't let him hide either. That balance you brought of grace and strength, of empathy and challenge, that's not something people find twice. You weren't trying to rescue him. You weren't trying to make him your project. You simply wanted to walk beside someone who wasn't afraid to rise. And when he showed signs of shrinking, you didn't shame him. You reminded him of who he was. And that voice, the one that came from love, not control, is the one that echoes the longest when it's gone. So if you're ever sitting there wondering if he's moved on, wondering if he's forgotten you, wondering if what you gave ever mattered, know this: he'll miss the way you believed in him. Because belief like that, it doesn't just walk away. It leaves a hole. You know what's interesting? A lot of people confuse love with tolerance. They think that the more you put up with, the more loyal you are. That enduring mistreatment is some kind of badge of honor. But the truth is, real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't demand that you betray yourself just to keep someone interested. One of the most powerful, unforgettable traits you can carry is having the kind of boundaries that command respect, not beg for it. And here's the part most people don't talk about. Boundaries aren't walls. They're clarity. They say, this is what I will accept, and this is where I draw the line. Not to punish the other person, but to protect your peace, your worth, your energy. That quiet confidence, that inner knowing of when to say enough is not only powerful, it's haunting. Because when someone walks away with grace instead of drama, it leaves a deeper impression. They're not trying to prove a point, they are the point. They are the point of your path to progress. There are no extraneous feelings. Listen to me, I'm not looking for favor, I'm looking for skill. This is how I do it. Nothing feels. A woman who knows how to love without losing herself is a rare force. And men, especially the ones who took that for granted, learn that the hard way. In the beginning, they may test you, not maliciously, always, but out of pattern, out of ego, out of comfort. Maybe they cancel plans last minute. Maybe they give you breadcrumbs of effort and expect you to feast on it like it's a 5-course meal. And if you're still hoping to win them over, you might justify it. You tell yourself, he's busy. He's just not good at communication. He's figuring things out. But there's a moment, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp, where something in you shifts. You stop chasing clarity. You stop trying to decode behavior. You stop negotiating for the bare minimum. And instead you choose yourself. That's the moment he starts feeling the ground shake, because you didn't scream, you didn't throw a tantrum, you just quietly started to disappear from the emotional dance. You didn't send 1,000 texts asking why. You sent one message. With your silence, I won't play small to fit into your world. That kind of boundary isn't reactive, it's rooted. And when a man loses a woman like that, he doesn't just miss the relationship. He misses the reflection of his best self that he saw in her presence. Because deep down, he knows she held him to a higher standard, not out of control, but out of care. And that standard, that energy, doesn't vanish just because she's gone. It lingers. It visits him in quiet moments. It comes back when the next person doesn't challenge him the way she did, doesn't elevate him the way she did, doesn't walk away the way she had the strength to. He may go on dates. He may even find someone easier, someone who says yes to everything, someone who doesn't call him out, someone who stays, even when staying costs her dignity. But over time, that ease turns into emptiness, because deep respect is born from boundary. And love without respect, it doesn't last. It doesn't grow. It doesn't change a man. He'll look back and remember the way you carried yourself, how you didn't resort to manipulation, how you didn't try to force love out of someone who couldn't offer it fully, how you had the strength to say, I'm worth more than this version of love. That statement, not said, but lived, burns into memory. It's not the woman who clings that leaves the biggest mark. It's the woman who loved fully, gave honestly, and still walked away when love was no longer being met with respect. And let's be honest, it's hard. Walking away isn't strength that comes from nowhere. It's built through heartbreak, self-work, and the painful realization that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means showing up fully while holding your own value. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to leave the space where you're being diminished. That's not cruelty, that's integrity. He might not get it at first. In fact, he might paint you as cold, say you gave up too quickly, say you were too much, too demanding, too hard to please. That's fine. Let him, because time has a way of revealing what ego hides. And when the dust settles, he'll realize you weren't too much. You were exactly enough for the version of him that never showed up. And that realization doesn't fade. And that realization, because once a man experiences the kind of woman who honors her standards, who doesn't need to scream to be heard, who doesn't play games but plays by truth, he learns something. He learns what real value looks like. And he realizes, maybe too late, that he didn't just lose a partner, he lost his mirror, the one who reflected his potential, the one who didn't settle for half versions of love, the one who left not out of anger, but out of self-respect. And that kind of woman, she doesn't come back. You know what hits a man long after you're gone? It's not always the way you looked or the things you did for him. It's something quieter, something that doesn't seem like a big deal at first. It's the way you carried joy, not as something he gave you, but as something you already had, a kind of happiness that existed before him, during him, and will continue after him. That energy, that emotional independence is because here's the truth. Most people don't know how to be fulfilled on their own. They attach themselves to someone else and make that person responsible for their mood, their confidence, their self-worth. But you didn't do that. You brought your own sunshine. You didn't wait for him to text you good morning to have a good day. You didn't need a date night to feel special. Your joy was yours. And that scared him in ways he didn't even understand. In the beginning, he probably found that magnetic. You were light-hearted, playful, interesting. He thought, wow, she's so happy, so full of life. But somewhere along the way, it started to dawn on him. You were like that, with or without him. And that truth, that's what lingers. Because men don't always consciously want someone who needs them, but they often feel more secure when someone depends on them emotionally. And you didn't. You invited him in, you wanted to share your joy with him, but you didn't need him to create it. That difference is subtle, but it's everything. You didn't demand he fix your loneliness. You weren't trying to fill a hole. You had a life, a real one, with purpose, passions, friendships, a sense of self. And when a woman shows up like that, it becomes painfully clear how rare that is after she leaves. So the model of empathy, of sensitively, of connection by heart, see, after the relationship ends, most people scramble for replacements, for something to numb the silence, for someone to validate that they're still lovable. But not you. You leaned into your life. You trusted that your happiness didn't disappear with him. And as much as he might have convinced himself that walking away was fine, it's in those quiet moments when he's surrounded by noise but still feels empty that he starts remembering. He remembers how he didn't have to entertain you to keep you. You weren't desperate for attention. You didn't constantly need reassurance. Your emotional world didn't orbit around his moods. That made him feel free, until he realized it also made you free. Free to walk away when your standards weren't met. Free to move on with your joy still intact. And that freedom, that's what he misses. Not because he controlled you, but because he couldn't. And your message wasn't lost upon him, because he could. He may be dating someone new now, someone who laughs at his jokes, compliments his haircut, sends good morning texts with heart emojis, but something will feel off. Because now he realizes he has to be the source of their joy, their emotional thermostat. And it's exhausting, because it wasn't like that with you. With you, it felt like ease. You were playful, radiant, secure. You weren't scanning his face for clues of how to feel that day. You were already okay. And sure, he probably thought you were a little too independent at times, maybe even said it like it was a flaw. But deep down, that independence wasn't cold. It was the very thing that made you trustworthy. You didn't manipulate. You didn't guilt. You weren't clinging. You were choosing him, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. And when someone feels like you want them without needing them to survive, that's a love they never forget. even if they were too blind to recognize it in the moment. Here's the ironic part. The very thing that made him feel most secure, your inner joy, is the same thing that now makes him feel your absence more profoundly. Because you didn't leave behind chaos or drama. You left behind peace. And nothing unsettles a man more than realizing that peace didn't need him. He won't say it out loud. He might never text you, never admit it, never give you the satisfaction of hearing the words. But there will be a moment, maybe months from now, maybe longer, when he's sitting next to someone feeling that something's missing, and it'll hit him. She didn't just love me. She loved her life. And I got to be part of it. That's what he regrets. Not just losing you, but losing the rare kind of woman who doesn't chase love to feel whole. A woman who was already whole when she met him, and still is, long after she's gone.